Welcome to Vibe Talks. Today we're doing a deep dive into something really critical, something very current. It's the potential for the U.S. to get, pulled into the conflict between Iran and Israel. It's definitely a situation causing a lot of unease, lots of big questions, especially with recent headlines floating around about, possible U.S. attack plans and then counter threats from Iran.
It really is high stakes, and it's much more layered than just looking at military power, isn't it? We're going to try and unpack what could happen if the U.S. does get drawn in. We'll look at the huge strategic ripples, Iran's potential responses, which are quite capable, by the way, and interestingly, the deep splits within U.S. politics and even public opinion about this.
Yeah, it's a surprisingly divided picture back home.
It's a really intricate web.
Absolutely. And to give you the full picture, we're pulling from various places recent reports from outlets like the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, analysis from experts like Abel Abdul-Ghaffar, the Middle East Council, and even a pretty recent Washington Post poll. So let's start with the core military issue, maybe. The thing that seems to have Israel particularly concerned, Iran's nuclear program, and specifically this one site that seems almost, untouchable.
That's exactly right, Fordo. When people talk about Iran's nuclear program and the difficulty in stopping it, Fordo comes up immediately. It's incredibly well protected. We're not just talking thick concrete here. It's built deep inside a mountain under something like 100 meters of solid rock.
100 meters? Wow.
Yeah, it makes it extraordinarily hard, maybe even impossible to hit effectively with standard weapons.
Right. And our sources seem pretty clear on this. Israel, even with its advanced military, just doesn't have the kind of weapon needed to penetrate that deep. So if someone did decide an attack on Fordo was necessary, who could actually do it? Who has that kind of specialized firepower?
And that's where the U.S. comes into the equation. They possess these massive bunker buster bombs, the GBU-57 MOP, for example. These things weigh around 13,000 kilograms. That's 30,000 pounds. Enormous. And they're not just big. They're designed specifically. Hardened casings, multi-stage detonation to literally drill through rock and concrete before they explode. They really are the only type of conventional weapon thought capable of potentially reaching that depth.
Okay. But even with these monster bombs, these incredibly engineered weapons, it's still not a sure thing, is it? The sources we looked at emphasize there's still a lot of uncertainty about whether even these bunker busters could do enough damage to really cripple the program down there.
Exactly. It's a high-risk operation with no guarantee of success, even for the U.S. military.
Which naturally leads to the question, why is Israel pushing so hard, apparently, for U.S. involvement?
Well, given their own limitations hitting a target like Fordo and the immense strategic threat they perceive from a potentially nuclear-armed Iran, U.S. action becomes almost essential from their perspective. They see the U.S. as having the key, the capability they feel they desperately need but lack themselves.
So Israel feels it needs the U.S. muscle here. But, okay, let's play this out. What if the U.S. does get involved? What's the immediate reaction from Iran? They wouldn't just take it.
Right, absolutely not.
If you just glance at a map of the region, it really hits home. You see all these U.S. military bases, some long-term, some newer, dotted all around, incredibly close to Iran.
Yeah, the visual is striking.
It just shows how exposed U.S. assets could be, almost literally on Iran's doorstep.
And it's not just the proximity, it's the density and the history of that presence. Abel Abdul-Ghaffar, the analyst from the Middle East Council you mentioned, he's been very clear, and sources back this up. He points to U.S. troops and forces, specifically in Iraq, Bahrain, and Kuwait, as being Iran's primary, most immediate targets if the U.S. were to join a fight.
And Washington seems well aware of this danger. We've seen those reports about the U.S. pulling out non-essential embassy staff from places like Iraq, Bahrain, Kuwait.
Precautionary measures?
Yet, it shows they're taking the threat very seriously. It's not just a hypothetical. There's a real sense of danger there.
Definitely. And this brings us to another critical point, the speed. How fast could Iran retaliate? The sources highlight that Iran's ballistic missiles could hit U.S. bases in the Gulf region in just 3 to 4 minutes.
3 to 4 minutes.
Yes. Think about that. That's almost no warning time, less time than boiling a kettle.
Wow.
It gives troops almost no time to get to cover, and it severely challenges any missile defense systems, which often need more time to track and intercept.
Yeah.
The potential for significant U.S. casualties very quickly is quite high.
That is sobering. So beyond the immediate missile threat, let's maybe zero in on some of these specific locations you mentioned. What exactly is at risk? Let's start with Iraq. That seems like a real flashpoint.
It is. You've got about 2,500 U.S. troops and contractors still there in Baghdad, up in the Kurdish north, out in the western desert areas. And we've already seen, drone attacks targeting bases like al-Assad, often carried out by Iran-backed Shia militias operating within Iraq.
Right, those attacks happen periodically.
They do. And the U.S.-Iran relationship in Iraq is incredibly tense, especially since 2020. After the U.S. assassination of Major General Qasem Soleimani, he led Iran's Quds Force, their main external operations arm. And the fact he was killed in Baghdad, reportedly while meeting the Iraqi prime minister, just poured fuel on the fire. It makes Iraq a very volatile place for U.S. forces if things escalate with Iran directly.
Okay, so Iraq is definitely complex. What about Bahrain? You mentioned that too. It's a major naval base, right?
Huge. Manama, Bahrain, hosts the headquarters for the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet. About 9,000 military personnel there. Its main job, securing the Strait of Hormuz.
The oil choke point.
Exactly. A massive amount of the world's oil, something like 20%, passes through that narrow strait every day. And Iran has not only the capability, but has explicitly threatened to disrupt shipping there, potentially by deploying thousands of naval mines, maybe up to 6,000.
Mines in the Strait of Hormuz. That would be chaotic.
Utter chaos. It would endanger U.S. warships, obviously, but it would also cripple global oil markets. Think about the impact on Saudi Arabia, the UAE, but also major importers like China and India. It's a massive economic weapon for Iran.
So beyond Iraq and Bahrain, there are other significant U.S. presences nearby too. Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, all within range.
All within easy missile range, yes. Kuwait has a large contingent, around 13,500 U.S. troops spread across 5 bases. That relationship goes way back, especially to the 1990 Gulf War.
Right, when the U.S. liberated Kuwait from Iraq.
And then used it as a staging ground for the 2003 Iraq invasion. Then you have Qatar, home to Al Udeid Air Base. This isn't just a base, it's the largest U.S. military installation in the entire Middle East, maybe 10,000 U.S. personnel. It's the regional HQ for U.S. Central Command, coordinating operations across the whole area, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. Its size and importance make it a prime target.
Okay. And the UAE?
Al Dhafar Air Base in the UAE. Around 3,500 U.S. military personnel. Recently, they've even based advanced F-22 fighter jets there. That deployment was largely in response to attacks on fuel tankers back in 2022, attacks carried out by Houthi fighters who have links to Iran. So again, it underscores the constant, immediate threat environment these bases operate in, all very close to Iran.
So if you add all that up, the missile speed, the vulnerable bases in Iraq, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, the potential Hormuz disruption, it really does seem like Iran holds quite a few strategic trump cards, as some might put it.
That's a fair way to put it. They have multiple ways to inflict significant pain on the U.S. and its interests and disrupt the global economy if they feel attacked or existentially threatened.
It paints a very stark picture of the potential military fallout. But like you said earlier, it's not just about military calculations. We need to look at the situation back in the U.S. How does the American public feel about getting involved?
Yeah, this is a crucial piece of the puzzle. Public opinion. That Washington Post poll from June 18th, 2025, it surveyed just over 1,000 Americans, is pretty revealing. It found 45% oppose an attack on Iran, only 25% support it. And then you've got 30% who are unsure.
So nearly half oppose, only a quarter support. That's a pretty clear plurality against intervention.
It is. And when you drill down into the politics, the divides get even sharper.
How does it break down by party?
Well, Democrats are strongly against it. About 2/3 oppose military action. Republicans are much more split. You've got 47% supporting an attack, but still 24% opposing it and almost 30% unsure. So not monolithic support even there.
Interesting. And independents?
They lean heavily against intervention, similar to Democrats, about 2/3 oppose.
And even among Trump voters, who you might expect to be more hawkish.
Even there, a significant chunk, 26%, oppose U.S. involvement. So the takeaway really is that a large number of Americans across the political spectrum, to some degree, really don't want the U.S. tangled up in a war with Iran. It's not a fringe view.
Right. And speaking of Republicans being split, that division isn't just in the polls, is it? It's playing out very publicly within the party itself. You have this quite vocal interventionist wing.
Oh, yes. The figures like Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Lindsey Graham, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, they're very much proponents of a strong, often preemptive U.S. military posture towards Iran. They argue it's necessary to counter Iranian aggression and prevent them getting nuclear weapons.
But then there's this other wing, the non-interventionist side, really echoing that America First idea that gained traction during the Trump years.
Exactly. People like Tucker Carlson, former Trump advisor Steve Bannon, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, they represent this strand of thinking. They argue, basically, that the U.S. should avoid foreign entanglements, especially costly, potentially endless wars in the Middle East, and focus on problems at home instead.
And that clash became really visible, didn't it? I remember that interview where Tucker Carlson really went after Ted Cruz on this very issue.
That's right. It was quite something. Carlson was essentially questioning Cruz's basic knowledge about Iran, asking him about its population size, while Cruz was advocating for military action.
Yeah.
It wasn't just political theater. It really laid bare that deep ideological crack within the Republican Party itself over intervention versus, well, staying out of it. It shows just how complex the decision-making process would be, even within one party.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. The military challenges, the potential Iranian responses, the divisions back in the U.S. As we wrap this up, what are the absolute key takeaways you think people should hold on to from this deep dive?
I think what really stands out is this kind of paradox. You have the immense power of the U.S. military, but it's facing very real constraints posed by Iran's hardened defenses like Fordo, and maybe more importantly, by the speed and variety of ways Iran could retaliate against vulnerable U.S. assets.
Right. It's not just about firepower.
No. It's a strategic puzzle where even a quote-unquote successful military strike could come at an incredibly high cost, potentially many U.S. lives, huge regional instability, economic chaos. And crucially, this whole complex international dilemma is now deeply tangled up with a fractured American political scene and public reluctance. It makes any decision incredibly fraught.
Yeah, and overlaying all of that is the inherent unpredictability, especially, as some sources note, concerning potential future administration actions, perhaps like a Trump administration, where that America First non-interventionist streak might clash with more hawkish advisors. The future path seems very uncertain. So here's a final thought for you to mull over. We've seen the poll numbers showing significant public opposition to getting involved. We've outlined the huge risks to U.S. forces, to regional stability, to the global economy. What does it mean for a country when its leadership might consider actions that seem to run counter to the expressed will, or at least the strong reluctance of a large part of its population, especially when the stakes are this high? It really raises questions about how much public opinion actually shapes foreign policy in these critical moments. That was today's Vibe Talks. Keep listening, keep thinking.